I have spent my life on the ocean, but nothing prepared me for the silence of a ghost ship. It was mid-October, and we were trawling near the edge of the shipping lanes, about 300 nautical miles off the coast. Our crew was small, just me, my son Mark, and a grizzled old hand named Silas. The day had been clear, the water calm, almost glass-like, which is eerie in its own right when you're that far out. Around 10 a.m., Silas picked up a strange, low-power distress signal on the archaic secondary radio we kept. It wasn't a standard mayday. It was static-laced, barely audible, and the voice on the other end was slow, almost slurring. It sounded like a man giving coordinates, but the coordinates were wrong, shifting constantly, like he was barely able to hold the mic. Then came the final transmission, clearer, punctuated by gasping breaths. I am dying. The crew is dead. I can see it. I can see the evil. Then nothing but an oppressive silence. We immediately reported it, but the coordinates were too vague and the signal was gone. We decided to head toward the general area. We arrived 2 hours later to find nothing but empty sea. Just as we were about to turn back, Mark spotted it. A rusty, old freighter listing slightly in the water. No lights, no flags, no movement. It looked like it had been drifting for decades, though the hull seemed intact. Silas and I cautiously motored up alongside it. The name on the bow was too rusted to read clearly, but it had a distinct old-world look to it. We tossed grapnels and boarded the ship. The first thing that hit me was the absolute stillness. Not just the lack of engine noise, but a stillness that absorbed sound. The air was unnervingly warm, heavy, and it smelled faintly of sulfur and something else, something deeply metallic and wrong. We started on the main deck. That's where we found the bodies. They weren't scattered, they were positioned. The whole crew, about a dozen men, were lying in the exact poses of their last moments. The radio operator was still slumped over the console. The captain was grasping the rail. Every single man had their eyes wide open, directed at the sky, mouths agape in a silent, horrific scream. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle or attack. They simply looked frozen in a state of impossible terror. Their faces were waxen. But what truly horrified me was that the tropical air should have caused rapid decay. Yet the bodies felt strangely cold, like they'd been dead for minutes, not hours. We moved cautiously toward the engine room, desperate to find a log or an explanation. As we stepped below deck, the metallic smell intensified. That's when we heard it. A low, rhythmic groan coming from somewhere deep within the hold. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like a massive, organic weight shifting. Then, the whole deck below our feet began to vibrate. Fear, pure, paralyzing, animal fear, seized us. We didn't wait. We scrambled back to our boat, cut the grapnels, and gunned the engine away from that ship. As we sped off, I looked back. The old freighter was beginning to list heavily to one side. Just as we cleared the fog line, a final plume of dark, thick smoke erupted from the center of the derelict ship, followed by a sound like a wet explosion. The ship was gone in less than a minute. We never told the Coast Guard the full story, only that we found the coordinates but nothing else. We agreed that whatever horror killed that crew wasn't a matter for official reports. It was something that belonged to the deep, something that looked at the sky and screamed. I still wake up sometimes, smelling that strange sulfur, and I wonder what evil the radio operator was seeing when he died. They say the sea gives and the sea takes. Sometimes it just shows you what you shouldn't see. We were chasing a school of tuna further out than usual, about 400 miles into the open Pacific. The weather was perfect, which is often a terrible omen. I was working the main haul line late that afternoon, and we had just dropped the huge industrial-grade anchor. It was the heaviest thing we owned, guaranteed to hold in any current. A few hours later, I noticed the anchor line was twitching, not moving with the current, but actively twitching, with sudden, short, violent jolts, like a massive electric current running through it. I called the captain, Old Man Gus, over. He stared at the line for a moment, his weathered face showing an unfamiliar alarm. "That's not current," he muttered, grabbing the line with a gloved hand. He immediately pulled back, swearing, "It's hot, burning hot." We started hauling the anchor up with the electric winch, but the machine groaned in protest. The resistance wasn't just weight. It felt like something was actively pulling back with incredible, living strength. The thick steel cable was vibrating so intensely it was blurring. Gus ordered us to stop the winch, fearing the cable would snap and whip through the deck. That's when the resistance stopped. For 5 terrifying minutes, the line was slack, completely dead. We all stood there, breathing shallowly, watching the cable disappear into the calm, twilight water. "It let go," whispered Silas. "No," Gus said, his voice flat. "It's just closer." And then, the sound. It was a sharp, cracking sound that came from the starboard side, directly underneath us. It sounded exactly like a giant branch being snapped, but amplified 100 times. The whole vessel lurched violently. We scrambled to look over the railing. The water was black, but just a few feet beneath the surface the sea was moving. It wasn't the slow roll of waves. It was a purposeful, rhythmic displacement of an immense volume of water. The movement was fast, creating a current that rocked our boat with ease. Then, from the blackness, 2 things rose. First, the anchor. It shot out of the water like a missile, spinning rapidly. The anchor, a massive piece of machined iron, was no longer a solid unit. The massive center shaft was bent and twisted like soft wire, and the heavy flukes were cleanly snapped off, leaving jagged edges. The line attached to it was frayed and smoking. Second, and infinitely worse, was the shadow. Directly below where the anchor had been, a shadow of impossible size moved. It was the color of fresh ink and so vast that it blocked out the last glimmer of light filtering from the surface. It curved, moving beneath the boat, and as it passed, it created a suction so powerful that the water level dropped a foot around the hull. We stood there, 3 experienced fishermen, unable to move or speak, watching that incomprehensible bulk pass beneath us. It was a shape without form, too enormous to perceive fully, but utterly definitive in its scale. It wasn't a whale, it wasn't a squid, it was an impossible creature of the abyssal dark. When the shadow was gone, Gus didn't give an order. He just walked to the wheelhouse, started the engine, and aimed the bow toward the distant land. We didn't retrieve our nets. We didn't speak. We just fled the open water, knowing that the deep ocean doesn't just hold mysteries. It holds things that break steel to show you how small you really are. I never went back to that longitude again.